I'm here at Nonington Farms and they've received some stewardship funding for hedge laying. So I've come here to work on some of their neglected hedges, they're bringing them back into good health for environmental reasons. So you get two effects. You get the bushiness brought down to the bottom and then an abundance of regrowth over the coming growing seasons. What that means is you end up with a really thick hedge, and that's great for nesting birds, and also it's great for corridors. So when you create a good thick hedge like this, it creates cover for all sorts of birds and mammals, and even things like newts will sometimes use hedgerows as causeways to travel along. So the process of hedge laying is very ancient and goes back to Saxon times and before, and it was originally for stock proofing. So it took an old gappy hedge, and by laying the stems as you see here, it makes a nice barrier that sheep or cattle were unable to get through. This is a southeastern style of hedge laying, which is obviously appropriate for the area, and you can tell that for a couple of reasons. First, it's what you would describe as a double brush hedge, but the brushy bits of the trees appear on both sides of the hedge. So traditionally this meant this hedge could be grazed on both sides, and the stools at the bottom would be protected from the grazing animals and would be able to regrow. The other thing that marks it out as a southeast style of hedge is the style of binding. So each of the hedgerow's trees are cut through in a special way, and when they're cut through they're referred to as pleachers. So if I take you here, you'll see that there's a long angled cut which I do at the base of the pleacher, and when I've completed that cut I'm able to bend it over, and you have a flexible tongue of wood and bark, and importantly the cambium layer, which is the bit where the cell division actually takes place and the tree does its growth. So that part is still living and healthy, and that means that this pleacher will remain alive although I've cut through most of the way. And then it's very important that you cut the stump off there, and that will mean that the regrowth will start nice and low down. The particular reason for that is if the hedge has to be relaid, say in 20 or 30 years, the regrowth will be coming right from the base, and you'll be able to lay it nice and low again. So once the pleachers have been cut and laid over, the next process is to put in the stakes. So at a distance between your elbow and your hand, you knock in a stake at every interval, right down the centre line of the hedge. So the idea of the stakes is they lock all the pleachers together. You try and get them down through the forks and through the brush, and that keeps it as one hedge. Now that isn't enough on its own, because every individual stake is not particularly strong on its own. So what you do is you put a weave along the top, and for the stakes and for the binders, as they're called for weaving, hazel is used. Sometimes willow and sometimes other woods, but in Kent and East Sussex it would traditionally be hazel. And these long pliable pieces of hazel are woven in, one to every stake, in a reoccurring pattern, which gives it its aesthetic appeal, because it looks rather like a coiling piece of rope as it goes along the top. Now the effect of that is that it locks all the stakes together, and therefore the whole hedge is tied together and won't be knocked over by the wind, and traditionally wouldn't have been knocked over by grazing animals. So if I give that a shake, you'll see that the whole thing is acting as one, and that will keep all the hedge nice and strong, whilst the regrowth can take over again, and the regrowth will come through the hedge and give it all stability. So in a couple of years, by the time all this hazel binding and stakes are starting to rot away, there'll be lots of substantial regrowth coming through the hedge, and the whole thing will be very stable. So these only need to last for 2 or 3 seasons, and then they'll just rot away and disappear. And that's the beauty of the system. It's all natural material, it regenerates the hedge, and it all rots away. There's no plastic, there's nothing left at the end of the process. It just takes an old hedge, regenerates it, makes it healthy and vigorous and good for the environment again.